Hello, SpongicX here. Well, I just beat the long-awaited Bayonetta 3 for Nintendo Switch, developed by Platinum Games, Sega, and published by Nintendo. I've got to be honest, folks, I really don't know where to start with this one. While the gameplay is about as good as the first two games, the story is... Oh boy, this is going to be a very divisive entry in the franchise, I can tell. And not just because of the controversy of the previous voice actress Helena Taylor. Just a heads up, this review will contain major spoilers. The story in this game is just terrible. It's a terrible witch's brew. Personally, I never found the stories of the Bayonetta games to be the best. They were fun to look at, have great music and action, but the writing and storytelling was pretty weak and predictable and kind of forgettable. Trying to describe the plots of these games is a real mess. But, like the first game, Bayonetta, she's a witch trying to recover her memories while trying to protect a little girl who, shocker, not really, is a younger version of Bayonetta. The second game felt very similar to the first game. Once again, Bayonetta is forced to babysit another kid. This time, plot twist, it's a young version of Loki, the god of chaos, so... basically the same plot twist as the last God of War game. It's almost like they stole it from Bayonetta 2. Hard to believe I've never seen anyone make comparisons between that, but... So, and then, meanwhile, Bayonetta's former rival and now best friend, Jeanne, was killed, and Bayonetta has to rescue her soul. So, the third game, it has a lot of the same stuff, like, you have, Bayonetta fighting off, like, weird beings, and, trying to save people, while also doing a little bit of babysitting once again, and... So, the third game just felt like a messy Marvel movie fused into the Bayonetta formula. We learn there's a multiverse in this one, and each of these universes contains their own version of Bayonetta and other characters we're familiar with. So you got, like, an Umbra Witch fighting to protect each of these different universes. However, some new powerful being is out to kill them all. The game opens up with us playing as Bayonetta as she appeared in the original Bayonetta 1, only to see her dying from the new threat. A new character named Viola is sent to another universe to find another version of Bayonetta, and try relying on her to collect these magical MacGuffins that can open a portal to an alpha universe to stop the main threat before it's too late. Meanwhile, Jeanne adventures off to find some professor in some kind of laboratory. Viola claims a certain professor knows a way to get them to where they need to go. So just a bunch of typical point A to point B video game MacGuffin stuff, and so right away, I already knew what two of the big plot twists were going to be, without even having to have them spoiled. So, the big plot twist is that Viola is the daughter of Bayonetta and Luca, and the scientist that they're looking for will turn out to be the real villain. And yet, both of those turned out true. However, nothing could prepare me for the real frustrating twist that is the game's final battle and ending. More on that later. For the most part, the game is decent. It has nearly every element you love and expect from a Bayonetta game. You've still got the Devil May Cry-esque combat with the hack and slash and shooting combos. You still have the torture and climax attacks. You still got the fighting that involves dancing and using Bayonetta's hair to summon demonic slaves to attack. You can still equip 2 weapons at a time and swap between them with a press of the L button. You still collect drop items from beating enemies to exchange at the Gates of Hell for healing items, accessories, and alternate costumes. Of course, you still have the Witch Time, where dodging at the right time causes the character to slow down time around them to unleash a fury of attacks. So, you also have some very annoying aspects from the previous games back in this one, including some of the brutal side missions, which include really annoying limitations, such as time limits, beating enemies or collecting items under a time limit, beating enemies without touching the ground, or the annoying joystick waggling and button mashing during the climax events and all that. So you still got all that annoying stuff. The game heavily encourages players to replay levels to find hidden items and try getting new high scores, just like the previous games. However, just like the other previous games, it also is real annoying to try to go back to some of these levels because they have so many heavily scripted moments that are unskippable. Moments where the characters are slowly walking around and giving off exposition. There's no way to skip this stuff, so it's real annoying if you just want to keep getting to the levels and get to the enemies and get the high scores and all that, but you're forced to go through all of these repetitive things that drag on, which it's bad enough that most of these levels can drag on for like 40 minutes, just gameplay alone, so then you have all this stuff that just drag it on even further. So, yeah, This game also has some new annoying parts that can't be skipped, including like giant kaiju monster fights. Like there's one where it was kind of funny at first. It felt like a nice tribute to Godzilla. There's a part where you have to control the main like summon that you see Bayonetta use in the previous games, Gamora, whatever its name is, the giant lizard thing, dragon thing, whatever. So there's a part where you have to control it and you have to fight like a towering monster through the cities of Tokyo. And it basically, as cool as it looks, it's very unfun to play though. It's just an over glorified version of rock paper scissors. So yeah, basically in each chapter you get at least one moment where you have to control like one of Bayonetta's giant summons and play some kind of boss fight slash mini game. And so the first one was like my least favorite. The kaiju monster fight was really slow and boring, but the others weren't too bad. Most of them just play kind of like rail shooters. So, for the most part, this game plays exactly like the first two Bayonetta games, reusing many of the same elements from the loading screen being a practice stage to some of the same music in certain spots, like the Hell's Gate music and all that, but they added a few new things to try to spice things up. One of the new gimmicks is where holding the ZL button allows Bayonetta. Most of these abilities are optional, but may need to be used at least once or a few times in certain chapters to progress through certain puzzles and all that, but these can range from using Gamera to smash through walls, or having a giant flaming spider climb up a building to smash a water tower in order to douse some flames below so Bayonetta can cross, or stuff like that. They were fun and destructive additions to the game. I just loved summoning them every once in a while just to flip over cars and cause explosions. Like, the damage physics or the destruction physics on this game are pretty stunning, even for a Switch game. Like, the graphics in this game aren't anything amazing. Like, they still feel like an old Xbox 360 game, but they're not like the worst ever, though, but they definitely look pale in comparison to most games you would find on it. Not only current consoles, but even Xbox One or PS4 for that matter. Man, I just wish Nintendo would announce a new console already, one that's on par with current consoles, but imagine how much better Bayonetta could look with current-gen graphics. Otherwise, I do think the cutscenes were a little more entertaining in this. Well, I did mention that the story in this was pretty bad. One thing that always bugged me about the previous Bayonetta games is how they couldn't make up their mind if they wanted the game to be in-game animated or use like shortcuts. Because one minute the characters are fully animated with like lip sync and all that, but then all of a sudden it shows them standing around like action figures with dialogue talking over them without their lips moving. I always hated that. It's like one minute the cutscenes are stunning and then they're boring to look at and listen to. And so, surprisingly, this game is mostly animated throughout. They only use like shortcuts during creative liberties, like trying to tell like a flashback or sometimes even mostly just flashbacks or certain exposition. Otherwise, all the cutscenes are mostly in gameplay, and they're pretty good for the most part. So, yeah, like, it was nice that they improved on the cutscene quality. It's just too bad that the story quality took a huge nosedive. So, another one of the big gimmicks in this entry is the weapons and the way they have assigned transformations. So, back then, mostly no matter what weapon Bayonetta had, she always had the same transformations, like how when holding the ZR button, or double tapping the ZR button while running, how she can turn into a panther to run faster, or holding the jump button allows her to turn into a crow to hover. So those were like her main primary transformations in the other games. But so by default, her main default weapon has a new transformation where she turns into Madame Butterfly, one of her summons, and so it allows her to float through the air and hover. So yeah, it also works as her way of sprinting as well. But now when you unlock your second weapon in the game, which is like a cross between a giant club and a rocket launcher, Bayonetta gets a new transformation that replaces the panther and, the panther, the crow, and even the butterfly transformation. And that is where, I don't know how to describe it, she turns into some kind of monster-looking thing, and so it allows her to sprint, but it doesn't allow her to hover anymore. Instead, it gives her a real it gives her like a rocketing triple jump basically. So she can you can hold the jump button for her to charge it up and release it to release like a longer and higher jump. And so it's kind of cool, not always useful, but I do kind of like that though, how there is a bit of strategy. So In order to get around certain areas, you might want to switch into a weapon that comes equipped with like an ability that'll help you get over certain platforms easier without having to worry about falling off. And like one of my favorite ones was the yo-yo ability that allows Bayonetta to transform into a giant spider, and she basically swings around like Spider-Man. She's also able to rollerblade around, and it's a really cool ability. And I just couldn't help but notice how this game had a lot of Marvel influence around it. I mean, it's basically Bayonetta into the Bayonetta verse, but not only that, but even the main villain, he has like these powers that are very similar to like the Mirrorverse powers from Doctor Strange. Just like the opening cutscene in the final battle alone will probably remind you of that. And so yeah. Anyways, there's just all these new weapons with altering transformations, and they were a really neat addition. Honestly, I thought that was a welcome change to the gameplay. Seriously, if they ever made a sequel to Cameo Elements of Power, I'd love to see them take inspiration from Bayonetta 3 for its gameplay. However, if there's one thing that Cameo got right, it was the way of letting players swap between these creatures. It was neat how there was like a little shortcut where you held a button and you got to use the right analog stick to open a little wheel where you tilt it in a direction to quickly select your character. Bayonetta 3 unfortunately does not have something like that. It only allows you to equip 2 things at a time. Where Cameo by default, you at least had shortcuts for 3 different monsters at a time. Bayonetta only gives you 2, and it doesn't give you an option to open up a select wheel in gameplay. You have to constantly press the minus button to pause the game and open up all these different pages in a pop-up menu and try to find the stuff you're looking for. And it's easy to get lost in this game, not only in the menus, but just like trying to learn how to play the game. It does not do a very good job at teaching players, newcomers, how to play the game. And so, and then not to mention how there are certain times where like in the game you're supposed to, you know, it's like a high fast game. It requires a lot of timing and dodging and attacking at the right moment. And so it doesn't help that at the same time there's a bunch of subtitles where characters are talking and trying to give you exposition on what to do, but it doesn't bother pausing the game to give players a chance to read that before going. So it's hard to concentrate and read this tiny text at the bottom of the screen or the side of the screen at the same time. And yeah, playing this game is a real mess. I was lost during a few parts. Like, it didn't take long for me to resume, but I just wish the game didn't overwhelm you with so much information at once. It needed to do a better job at easing players into it. And so, while the gameplay was overall a nice balance of old and new, the violence felt very watered down in this game. I mean, this is still a game that warrants an M rating, but we're used to seeing Bayonetta, like, tear up angels and demons in a very bloody fashion. But in this game, she's mostly just fighting giant blobs of green goo and machinery. So the main threat is said to be a lab experiment gone wrong, where humans are being transformed to these green blobby mechanical hybrids. So just isn't as satisfying to see Bayonetta destroy enemies, only for Splatoon-looking ink to shoot out of the enemies instead of a fountain of blood like in the first 2 games. I mean, blood still makes an appearance in this game, just mostly in cutscenes and less in gameplay, but some of the angel enemies from the original games do appear, but they're hidden as side combat missions, since they aren't really the main villains of this game, like in the first 2. So, you still get halos for defeating the angels, but since there are less angels in this game, that means coming across halos will be much harder. And they're used for certain collectibles in this game instead of main collectibles. Like in the other games, you mostly just collected halos for everything. So this one, you got like 3 separate collectibles. You got like green orbs, red orbs, and the halos. So the green orbs are like the most common ones. You'll find those like scattered throughout levels. Like they respawn every time you go into a level or every time you die, or, you know, they're easy to come by. The red orbs only appear from defeating enemies, and so I forgot to mention, the green orbs are mostly for just like casual upgrades, like they're used for like healing items, and sometimes you can get a few stat increasing items like the hearts or the pearls that help increase your magic meter, stuff like that. The red orbs are used for upgrading your character's abilities in the skill tree sections in the menu and all that, and so that's good for upgrading your weapons and abilities, also your summons. So the halos are used purely for cosmetics, just alternate costumes and color schemes for the characters. So some of the costumes are nice, but they do feel like a downgrade compared to what we had in the first 2 games, especially the Wii U and Switch ports. Bayonetta 1 and 2 on Wii U and Switch contain neat costumes based on Nintendo characters that altered Bayonetta's attacks and collectibles and sound effects to fit the game that they're from. All those cosplay outfits are gone now, and not even as an unlockable. I was hoping at least you had to wait till you beat the game to get them, but nope, they're not even an option. So, a bunch of the other side outfits that Bayonetta could get are gone as well. Instead, all of her unlockables are based on alternate dimension Bayonettas that you encounter throughout the game. So, for the most part, some of these outfits are neat, but they still feel lacking compared to what we used to get in past entries. You also get a chance to buy her costumes from Bayonetta 1 and 2 as post-game unlockable content. You also get to unlock Jeanne as a playable character to play in side missions. And if you have save data for Bayonetta 2 on your Switch, you'll eventually get a chance to buy an in-game weapon set that changes your moveset and transformations to match that of the gameplay from Bayonetta 2. So a nice plus for those who preferred how she played in Bayonetta 2. As much as I love having multiple playable characters in video games, especially if they're optional, Bayonetta 3 handled it all wrong. It gave us 2 additional playable characters, but they each had either minor or drastically different gameplay. So first off is Jeanne, who is a pretty memorable character from the past 2 entries, starting off as your rival and becoming basically your best friend slash sister figure. So her gameplay felt very out of place in this game. I mean, she was actually playable in Bayonetta 2. You got to play as her in some of the side levels or even some of the main levels. And she basically was kind of like a harder mode for Bayonetta. She basically had all of Bayonetta's abilities, except she did not have the witch time, which allowed her to swap, which allowed Bayonetta to slow down time around her. So, yeah, Jeanne was definitely not necessarily an expert mode, but a more challenging mode. She wasn't as skilled as Bayonetta, so it made playing as her more of a challenge. She is more for the challenge seekers. So, instead, in this game, she gets these retro-styled side-scrolling levels where she has to sneak through lab rooms and avoid enemies, and her controls just felt terribly off during these parts. She has, no double jump, which every other character in this game has, and she even had a double jump in Bayonetta 2, so I don't know why they got rid of it. Her attacks are very weak for no reason, and these parts were just rather annoying. I mean, they get over with pretty quickly if you know what you're doing, but I don't know, I just did not enjoy them. They were boring to look at and even more boring to play through, and I'm just glad it wasn't one of those missions where if you get caught by an enemy, it's automatically game over. Luckily, it gives you a chance to fight off the enemies, and it gives you plenty of time to spare, but it still took me a while to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do at the beginning of those missions. Yeah, those were some of my least favorite parts of the games. However, the worst defender in this game, not only for the character itself, but the gameplay itself, is the new character, Viola. I hated this character ever since she was first revealed. I just thought she looked like a clown, trying too hard to be cool and edgy and relatable to modern-day audiences, like that cringy redesign for Tana in Crash Bandicoot 4, and I really tried giving this character a chance. I was hoping, maybe her character would be better than she appeared, but the game just kept giving me more and more reasons to hate her, and the ending just made me hate her so much that I am honestly not interested in the future of this series going forward. All she ever does in this game is just whine, bitch, and swear, and I just got sick of it. It doesn't help that I already figured this annoying mess of a character was going to be revealed to be Bayonetta's daughter, and when the truth finally came out, I felt nothing by the revelation. Sometimes, even though things can seem predictable, there are times where a story can do so good at it, despite how you knew what was coming, it can still throw you through a loop with how they present it, and unfortunately, this game was not the case. I didn't care for her moveset either. She was just a more sluggish and clumsy character compared to Bayonetta, and there's another reason why I hate this character, but I'll save that towards more later in the video. But yeah, every time the game forced me to go back to this boring, try-hard character, I moaned with frustration every time. I just wanted her to go away. I wanted to go back to Bayonetta, but nope, it just had to focus on this ugly character. And the only good thing I have to say about her inclusion is her battle theme was decent, and her sidekick Cheshire was pretty cool. Cheshire is basically just a giant demonic Totoro who rides a unicycle and likes to smoke the heavy stuff, but I just don't get why this game had to include Viola. Honestly, I think it would have been a better pairing to just have Bayonetta be forced to tag along with Cheshire. seeing how Bayonetta would respond with this crazy character would have been kind of interesting. But like Cheshire made for a great like battle partner, but it's a shame that every time the only way to use him is you had to be playing as Viola, and Viola also has like the worst alternate outfits in the game. While Bayonetta gets all these different outfits inspired by different time periods and cultures, Viola, she just gets different colors of the same t-shirt, just a t-shirt with a cat on it, and it's like, that's it. She's still dressing like cringe either way. So, there's also a stupid subplot where the character Luca is suddenly a werewolf for who knows what reason. I mean, they don't even explain it or try giving a reason for how it happened, just like the rest of the plots in these games. So most of the game involves Bayonetta traveling through time and dimensions to try and find these 5 gears needed to reach the final level. So the game starts off where you already have the first one because Viola had it, and so you have to find the other 4. In each place Bayonetta visits, we find other dimensional Bayonettas with different styles, themes, and ways of attacking. In the first level, modeled after Shibuya, Tokyo, Japan, we get a punk-looking Bayonetta who fights with yo-yos, transforms into a spider to climb up walls and climb among like some steep terrain, and she also fights with a giant flaming spider. Part of the level forces you to play as this alternate Bayonetta, and it was a really cool sequence. She rode around on these rollerblades and was able to swing across crumbling buildings and incoming subways that are flung at you. And out of nowhere, this awesome Spider-Gwen-esque Bayonetta just gets killed out of nowhere. And Bayonetta is requested to take her power and summons and use it to press onward. Followed by a multi-phase boss fight and a boss fight minigame involving Bayonetta's demon slaves. So, right at this moment, I was guessing this would be a repeated pattern for the rest of the game going forward. I had a feeling that every time you went into a new chapter, it would have been where, okay, you go into another region or time period, you find another variant of Bayonetta, she does something badass and gets killed the exact same way, Bayonetta takes her powers, rinse and repeat. And yeah, for the most part, that is true. So it kind of has a bit of like a Mega Man inspiration there, I guess, you could say, but... So the second world involves a Chinese-themed level where we get a demonic train as our new summon, and we find a Chinese Empress version of Bayonetta, and the third chapter has us in a desert where we find an Egyptian princess version of Bayonetta. Both she and the Chinese Empress were my favorite variants of Bayonetta. Too bad all the other Bayonettas don't get as much of a presence as the spider one from Tokyo in Chapter 1. Chapter 1 gave us a fun section where we got to play as this awesome new variant of Bayonetta before she tragically dies out of nowhere. The other chapters really half-ass it. Not only do we see less of these other variants of Bayonetta compared to Chapter 1, but we don't even get to play as them. So their deaths feel less impactful in the Spider Bayonetta, where we actually got to live out a bit of her awesomeness before witnessing her death. And I mean, on the bright side, the game kind of makes up for it, because each time these, other Bayonettas die, you get to take their powers, which means if you want to see what it's like to play as them, you got to equip their weapons and equip their costumes that you can unlock later on, and that's basically a way of playing as these characters. But either way, story-wise, it didn't give us as big of an investment, so it's like the first one felt tragic, because you actually got some time to feel a little bit badass with that Spider Tokyo-based Bayonetta, and then when she dies, it felt kind of heartbreaking, and they don't bother doing that with the rest, so it doesn't feel as impactful. It's like you just barely meet these characters and they die. So I'd say, despite how I like the appearance of her, I'd say the Egyptian one was the most underwhelming of the bunch. The chapter barely includes her, and it focuses more on an Egyptian version of Jeanne, who was a loyal servant to the Egyptian princess version of Bayonetta. Luckily, you do get 2 bonuses for that chapter. You get weapons and summons that were based on the weapons and summons that both Jeanne and Bayonetta had in their Egyptian forms. So, honestly, it was during the second and third chapters of the game that were the worst for me. Like, I thought the prologue and Chapter 1 were fantastic. They were fun, they were action-packed, they were adrenaline-filled, and then it wasn't until Chapter 2 and 3 where I just felt like the levels were dragging on, and it was getting kind of boring. Like, that was where they started introducing more playable characters, and they just started recycling the same scenery and destructible objects over and over that it nearly bored me to sleep many times. So So the Chinese level started off kind of cool, where you're running along like the Great Wall of China as you see like an army getting wiped out by all these different invaders and all that. But the longer the level drags on for, the more boring and repetitive it gets. Then the train summon you get in this was, and transformation as well, were also my least favorite in the game. Like the train, it just replaces your jumping and running with a train transformation. It's good for long jumps, and it moves pretty fast, but it's not good for getting an extra jump, and I prefer the transformations that help give you an extra jump, or at least allow you to hover. So just having one that allows you to dash through the air wasn't very satisfying. And there are other transformations you get throughout the game that make that one feel so obsolete. So, hell, even the first two transformations in the game were ones I still went back to, but I never went back to the train one after that. And so, Chapter 3 started off really bad. It focused on Viola, and it was mostly scripted sections of Viola struggling through a desert while she's getting dehydrated and bitching all the way. So you just have to keep controlling her as she sluggishly keeps moving, and it's like playing this level on replay mode would be so annoying because you won't be able to skip these sections. So if you want to try finding all the collectibles you missed, tough luck. You got to keep going through this shit again, and then it would make it more frustrating if you beat the level only to find out you still didn't find everything. But the level gets slightly better as she passes out, because then you get to take control of Cheshire, who takes over, and you control him a bit while he's looking for water to recover Viola, and so that part was a little bit better, but once the level goes back to Bayonetta, that's where the chapter gets a little bit better. We get 2 new summons and weapons for completing the Egyptian chapters. The first summon and weapon are from the Egyptian Jeanne, which includes a large singing frog as your summon and a spear as a transformation. A spear as a weapon. The spear allows us to transform into an amphibious being with a strong triple jump. The summon you get from the Egyptian Bayonetta is a giant bird that can blow gusts of wind to power wind-generated contraptions, while the weapon you get from the Egyptian Bayonetta is arguably my favorite in the game, the one I used on throughout since I got it, and it's one that allows you to wield 2 blades, and it can not only shoot wind, but the transformation allows you to turn to a bird that can allow you to soar and hover through great distances at a pretty decent speed as well. The next chapter is one of the lengthiest in the games, but it's somehow less of a drag than the last 2 chapters. Somehow this chapter is just more entertaining gameplay-wise. The 4th chapter takes place in Paris, France. So first, Bayonetta is forced to fight off a corrupted version of her mother, probably one of the most heartbreaking boss fights in the game. I liked how Bayonetta's mother, her summon, was a weaponized version of the Umbra Clock Tower, who fans of Bayonetta 1 or the past 3 Super Smash Bros. Games should be familiar with by this time. In a surprising twist, the Bayonetta of this world is actually a villainous thief, and she's also a boss fight, the final boss fight for that level, and it was an interesting boss fight too. She fought with a mixture of witchcraft and parlor tricks, like shooting firecrackers out of a magic hat, and she also fights with a giant bat-like demon that can shoot lasers and see in the dark to locate invisible enemies, and so after the Paris level, you finally have all the keys needed for the final level. You have to play one last level as Jeanne in what feels like a parody of Excite Bike, but with guns. Jeanne has to deliver the scientist to Bayonetta so he can open a portal to try stopping the game's main threat. As Jeanne stays behind to fight off incoming threats, for some reason we get an end credit scene after Jeanne's level, almost like the game's over already, but it really isn't. It doesn't take you to a menu right after, it just continues to the next cutscene, next level, and sadly, that's not the last time we'll see multiple credits in this game, but so as Bayonetta gets to the Alpha universe, she's taken down what she thinks is the final boss, while also having to fight a werewolf Luca at the same time. After thinking Luca might have died, Viola appears out of nowhere, along with Luca, showing that he's okay. So suddenly, Viola and Bayonetta realize the place they were sent to was a decoy, and that the scientist they brought was actually behind all the evil going on. Meanwhile, it cuts back to the scientist, and it reveals that he killed Jeanne, and unlike the previous game, she doesn't come back after this death. She's gone. So, quite unfortunate for those who liked her, and yeah, she's dead, and she's not coming back. But wait, it gets worse. So, Bayonetta manages to get her way back to New York in the same universe where the game took place. The same place where we saw that alternate version of Bayonetta get killed at the beginning. So, We get many endless phases against the same boss over and over, with many cutscenes that keep coming and leaving, and this was honestly the most tiring final battle out of any game I've ever seen. Not only for the gameplay, but for the cutscenes and the payoff. It was the worst. There's just no other way of putting it. This game felt like a giant FU to the fans, and so the game just keeps teasing the fans with what looks like an epic climax, only to give players the middle finger every single time. At one point, it looks like Bayonetta frees the spirits of all the Umbra witches the villain has killed, and it looks like they're all about to gang up on him and kill him. But then he just immediately swipes them out with like a swipe of one hand, and they're all gone again, leaving just Jeanne left with Bayonetta. But then Jeanne gets killed again, so it's like, what was the point of that? It felt like it was trying to get fans all excited just to underwhelm them. And then the game has the nerve to keep doing that with us throughout the final battle. So the game cuts to Bayonetta in a weakened state, and she nearly gets killed the same way Bayonetta did at the beginning of this game. Viola finally reveals that Bayonetta and Luca are her parents, but they don't make it clear like which variants of Bayonetta and Luca are her parents, because as far as I know, it's not the versions that we've been playing. It's not the Bayonetta we've been playing as throughout this game. That's her mother, because otherwise it wouldn't explain why Viola still exists after the events of this final battle. Major spoiler alert. But so Viola tries saving Bayonetta but fails miserably. Out of nowhere, two other variants of Bayonetta from different dimensions show up, and with no explanation either. But this time, they are the designs from Bayonetta 1 and 2. So it seems to imply that each of the Bayonettas from each of the games we played were not direct sequels. They were their own different universe. So that's why they had such different hairstyles and outfits in each game. It wasn't the same Bayonetta. It was a different one each time. And so that explains why Bayonetta looks different in this version of Bayonetta. So that felt a bit jarring, but it was kind of cool to take control of the original Bayonetta as Bayonetta 2 fought alongside her. But it doesn't amount to much, because either way, both of them die as well. That was a load of bullshit. So, yeah, more of this stuff just keeps happening throughout the final battle, each phase getting more tiring than the last. And so eventually, Bayonetta 3, so yeah, the Bayonetta we played as throughout this game, I'm just going to call her Bayonetta 3 now. So eventually, Bayonetta 3 steps in and manages to finish off the baddie once and for all, but at the cost of the emblem on her chest getting destroyed, which was the only thing needed in order to keep her summons under her control. So with her emblem gone, Gamera turns on Bayonetta and kills her the exact same way he killed Jeanne at the beginning of Bayonetta 2. So before Bayonetta 3's soul gets claimed by the demons of hell, Luca and Bayonetta declare their love for each other as they both get dragged down to hell. Luca decides to go down with the ship with Bayonetta, basically. So after that, we get the credits. So it's like, yeah, that was a pretty depressing ending. The main characters die. Like, the main characters from the first two games are dead now. And so then it cuts back to, after the credits, it cuts back to Viola, and the game isn't over. Viola is forced to fight a Kraken boss fight, the same Kraken we fought earlier in the prologue of this game as Bayonetta. But then after that, we gotta fight some dark entity resembling Bayonetta 3. And for some reason, after you defeat the Dark Entity, a spirit of Bayonetta appears and says how proud she is of Viola, and passes on the name of Bayonetta to her. So, and so after another end credit scene, now with the original Frank Sinatra rendition of the game's battle theme playing in the background, so now Viola is donning the same glasses that Bayonetta wore, and she sets off on her next adventure, going by the name Bayonetta, with a teaser saying that Bayonetta will return for a new generation. This ending pissed me off so hard. It's bad enough that I hated Viola to begin with, but it killed off Bayonetta, Jeanne, Luca, and not only did it kill them off, but it killed off every variation of these characters from multiple universes, and is trying to force this new cringy version of this new character named Viola, is trying to say she's the new name and face of the series going forward. This ending just is a confusing mess. It made a confusing mess out of an already confusing plot from previous games, and it just makes it worse. This ending is a huge slap in the face for anyone who liked Bayonetta as a character and a series. It has the nerve to imply that Bayonetta 2 wasn't a direct sequel to Bayonetta 1. It has the nerve to tell us that the Bayonetta we knew and loved is dead now, and the one we've been playing throughout this entire game just didn't matter. All that mattered was Viola. It was just a brutal passing of the torch to a character that no one should give a shit about, and all of this was, I don't know, no thanks, no freaking thanks. I am just done with this franchise going forward. I'm sorry, but this story just sucked. It was so much more insulting than the ending of Kingdom Hearts 3. I mean, who asked for this? Why did the makers of this game feel they needed to troll the fans so hard? What were they trying to prove here? Like, overall, the gameplay is still good, and that's what really matters in a video game, but that story and that ending really took a huge toll on this game, and the ending left a real horrible taste in my mouth. It wasn't enough to make me hate the gameplay, but it was enough for me to not care about the future of this franchise. They can call her Bayonetta all they want, but I will never call Viola Bayonetta, ever. So overall, I'd probably give the game a 7 out of 10. I might have given it an 8 or 9 out of 10 if the story wasn't so insultingly bad to Bayonetta's legacy, or if it at least had a mode that lets us replay levels that skip all the cutscenes and annoying scripted sections. Maybe even a way to play as Bayonetta in Viola's levels or something, so you don't have to keep playing as her if you want to try completing the game. I mean, it's sad that this game had to end on such a downer of an ending, and ruin the way we saw Bayonetta as a character. It's like they're trying to say all Bayonettas across different universes sucked, and Viola is better than all of them. Deal with it. This ending just infuriated me. I still look forward to replaying levels to level up more Bayonetta's abilities, but I am not touching any of the levels that involve Viola or Jeanne ever again. Well, that's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching, see you next time, and have a great day.